Hello, everyone, and welcome to Powerful Women's In Conversation series. I'm Elizabeth Baxter, Director of Project Finance at Synetics and Board Member of Powerful Women. I'm delighted to be here today talking to my fellow Powerful Women Board Member, Simon Fanshawe. Welcome, Simon.
Hello. Hi, Elizabeth.
Thank you for being here with us. Simon, to start, would you please share your story with us?
Well, one's always in danger, isn't it, when going to a funeral and after 25 minutes they say, and then he went to primary school. So I won't share the whole of my story with you, but I suppose the important things are kind of why have I got involved in my life in questions of diversity, and what is it that I've learned, I suppose, from 2 or 3 key moments. I think the first thing that happened to me was that in the 80s, I went to the University of Sussex and was viciously and intellectually beaten around the head by feminists and people from different social backgrounds. And it was a challenging and difficult and enormously enriching time where I was really being asked, well, what kind of man are you? And what does it mean that you're upper middle class or whatever? And where does that fit in if you're going to be involved in politics and change? And that was enormously important for me. It really taught me that actually challenge is valuable, difficult, and that actually always worth it, you know, from sources that you respect. I think that's an important element. I had a very important experience too in the 80s when people who are watching, certainly from the UK, might remember a government piece of legislation called Section 28, and this was explicitly designed to ban, quotes, the promotion of homosexuality as a pretended family lifestyle. And this was really an attempt actually to beat up left-wing local authorities, councils. It was, you know, lesbians and gays have always been handy in that way as a sort of tool to you know, if you want to look liberal and you're on the right, you kind of cozy up to the gays. You know, if you want to look right on and you're on the left, you cozy up to the gays. We're very useful. And if you want a dog whistle, you know, you attack the gays. We set up an organization in response to that called Stonewall, which between 1989 when it started and 2005 moved the legislative agenda from entirely discriminatorily or laws that were entirely discriminatory to equal marriage. And what I learned working with other folk on that was something really important, which was that actually you can form broad alliances with people who don't agree with you, even about the central subject. So we had, you know, alliance. We could convince people who were in a certain wing of a religious organization, for instance, who thought we were a sin, but we could nonetheless convince them that actually unequal treatment under the law of a group of people just for being a group of people was something that they didn't like either. So Catholics understand that, Jews understand that, Muslims understand that. So I learned something very important about organization, well, in that case, societal, but organizational change, which is the way you make it work is you appeal to a bigger principle around which people, a bigger principle which expresses what you're trying to achieve. And so if you transfer that to an organization, look at an energy company or whatever, actually in work, you don't choose the people you work with. They don't choose you, you don't choose them. You're thrust together. The only thing you've got in common is this central direction of travel. So what's interesting is how can you then collaborate around that central direction? And my proposition is that you collaborate through difference, not through similarity. In other words, you don't collaborate through agreement, oddly. You collaborate by disagreeing and then finding a way forward. So those are kind of 2 key things for me that formulated my attitudes.
Thank you, Simon. That's so important, as you say, about a unifying overall arching principle. And you have a phrase that I love, Simon, which is, achieving true diversity is not spicing up the stew, it's changing the recipe. What do you mean by that?
Well, one of diversity and this whole focus on inequality, which is where this whole conversation about diversity comes from, has tended to be concentrated on minorities or minority status groups, i.e. women, who are not a minority but are treated as if. My view is that that's not the case, actually, that in fact everybody has something to contribute to this, and it's not It's not just adding, you know, diversity is not like, well, let's take a couple of blacks, 2 gays, 3 women, add water and stir. You know, it's not a recipe, it's not magic. What you have to do is realize that when you create difference like that, you change the situation, you change the whole of the recipe. It's, as I said, it's not just about adding a bit of this and adding a bit of that. So you're actually changing the norm. You're not spicing up the norm. A very good example, I've always thought, is a wonderful dance company I know called Canduco. And Canduco have dancers who are in wheelchairs, who don't have all 4 limbs. Some of them do have all 4 limbs. Some of them have education and learning challenges, etc. What they've done is, because they are of different abilities, they've actually created a new choreographic form. So it's not like they've taken the old choreographic form and sort of diddled with it a bit. They've created a whole new form. So when you see somebody on their legs with their arms dancing with somebody in a wheelchair, that's a new form of choreography. So that's what I'm saying to organizations, is create that new way of doing things. Don't just think we'll add a bit of this and add a bit of that.
The stories that you share are so moving and really help us understand and sort of embody the power of difference. I really enjoyed reading your recent book, The Power of Difference, and there was a particular quote in it: "The process of inclusion is the journey through difference towards collaboration." I was wondering if you could share with us another story that embodies that view.
Well, yeah, 2 or 3. So let's take a historical one, for instance. I was involved at the University of Sussex. I went there as an undergraduate, and then I was a chairman. And one of the founder, really, it was a person called Asa Briggs, a very famous historian, who was a code breaker at Bletchley. And if you've seen the film, some people have seen the film with Benedict Cumberbatch, this actually only unfortunately occurs in a nanosecond in a scene in the bar. But the thing about cracking the Enigma code, and what Alan Turing did in creating the early computer, was that the computer sped up the process, because when you crack a code, you look for patterns. And what he managed to do was create this extraordinary thing called the bomb, which speeded up the ability to process this huge amount of information. But actually, you've got to see the patterns in the first place. You've got to have a guess at what the patterns might be. So somebody who worked at Bletchley, who was actually a student of German society, not a mathematician, not a technician, said, I know what I know about the Germans suggests that they will sign off by rank. So they started to look for patterns in the sign-offs of the coded telegrams that they were intercepting, and also whether they could see Heil Hitler. In other words, it was a historian and a sociologist combined with a mathematician and a technician. And that's the combination, that it's bringing those different perspectives. So if you then think of the energy transition. So is the energy transition simply a technical question? We've just got to produce, better, less energy consuming this is or that. So we've got to adapt the way, we've got to draw energy from wind or sun or whatever. Actually, it's not just that. So we worked with a College of Doctoral Training in Nottingham, and they have a unit called Sushi, which focuses on hydrogen. And Gavin, who runs it's really interesting, because he says, look, this is not just about boffins producing better hydrogen. This is about me recruiting a cohort of PhD students who both understand and want to investigate the technical element of hydrogen. But if we're going to make that a viable alternative source of energy, we have to convince people in industry and domestically to change the forms of energy they're using. So I need people who are interested in behavior change, not just in one country, but globally. And I need people who are going to engage with not just the science, but the sociology and the societal forces. So that's what I mean by it. It's this idea that problems by and large are not solved by a single technical answer. They're solved by this rather wonderful combination of difference when people go, hang on a second, and then suddenly somebody comes and looks at it from a different angle. And that's when you get the new recipe.
Wonderful. And to achieve the full benefits of that recipe, I think employees need to feel they can bring their whole authentic self to work, and we all have fundamental needs for belonging and connection. To what extent do you think today employees can bring their whole self to work?
Well, the first thing I would say is, God forbid that people bring their whole selves to work. I mean, you really wouldn't, do you know what I mean? You wouldn't want the whole of me at work. I mean, we're not at the pub. Do you know what I mean? But I think what that phrase means, because I know there's an intent behind it, and I want to know what you feel as a woman, and in the company you work in. But what I think, I always say to people, look, I think we need to put the emphasis on a different word in the sentence. People put the emphasis on the word self, and I think that's part of a very self-centered, individualistic, really rather narcissistic mood that we're all in at the moment. Bring my whole self to work. It's all about me. Actually, no, I think it's about bringing yourself to work. So how I would interpret it is this, is can you come to work and bring through your personal story everything that assists your collaboration with the others towards this common purpose? So that's what I mean by this. So for instance, I can't remember whether you have children or not.
Yes. You
do. So you will be bringing things, I'm guessing, let me ask you this, you will be bringing things to work that you've learned as a mother. Because
absolutely,
bringing up kids and managing kids is an astonishingly complex task, and you will apply stuff. So I mean that. Do you feel that you do that when you come to work? You're bringing part of Elizabeth's story into the way in which you then achieve, in your case, better project finance for solar power.
Yes, I would say being a parent has made me a better leader in the office, because parenting is about soft power and influence, that you have to inspire others to put it crudely, sometimes do what you would like them to do, but you can't physically force a person, and you get the best results in terms of leadership if you're using that sort of soft influence where others are inspired to want to do what to follow and execute your vision. And for me, the growth I've had as a business leader as a result of parenting is to give others a bit more space, that they're independent and they should all be treated with respect, and to try to use that softer power to influence behaviors.
So I once said at a conference, I often say it now because of this, I said that when a woman takes time off to have babies and come back, organizations typically ask them what they've forgotten. And I said, don't ask them what they've forgotten, ask them what they've learned, as you've just described. And a woman in the audience, she went, yay! So I went up to her after and said, what was that about? She said she had twins 6 years before, and since she came back to work, her career had skyrocketed. And I said, why? And she said, well, not being flippant, she said, I realized you can manage everybody as toddlers. What she also said, which is fascinating, she had identical twins, but they were different. And that really gave her an understanding of exactly that, that notion of, you look at the people that you're managing, or the company that you're managing, or the people you're working with, human difference this is a fundamental. I mean, it wasn't invented when people started talking about diversity. The fact that we can't see the world from anybody else's point of view, that's fundamental to being human. So the so-called diversity journey is just the human journey of trying to do so in the certain knowledge that you never will. So management, collaboration, it's all about unknowing. It's all about discovering curiosity, which is why in the context, say, of powerful women and the energy transition, it's why it's so vital. It's not just about saying, men move aside, let's move the women in. The whole point about powerful women is saying that you'll get a better solution, we'll get better ways through, more imaginative ways through the energy transition if we start to combine difference. And one symbol of that difference is the difference between men and women. Because what happens when you put men and women together in a workplace, actually, and you significantly value that, actually the way in which you make decisions, the way you assess risk, those things do actually change.
So we clearly need people's different perspectives and voices to be valued and respected. And we, as you know, Powerful Women and Bain & Company have recently published a report on cultivating female talent and energy, particularly in middle management, where we conducted a big survey and interviews, and culture, inclusive culture, came through as so important to achieving the benefits of that diversity of thought and perspective. What do you think, Simon, are the traits of an inclusive leader?
Well, let me just say something just before that. What I think is really interesting about that report is it yet again underlines this idea that actually it's a correlation between diversity and performance. It's not causation. And what the report says really clearly is this: if you focus, in this case, on women as a company, and you make sure that training opportunities, mentoring, whatever, are available, and in other words, you focus on talent development, what you will do is you will generate higher performance. Now, the reason that's true is that actually typically women don't get that focus and no one bothers. Similarly, so do lots of young people actually in businesses. They're not brought on. They think, oh, you're a bit young, you know, time will tell, what, or whatever. Or you say to people as a particular view of, say, you know, of young black people or whatever you might find. In other words, what's really going on here is the focus on the development of talent on groups that don't necessarily get that focus. So it's, in a sense, what you're doing there is creating a culture where, to go back to your question, the notion of the inclusive leader, the characteristics of the inclusive leader are that she understands or makes time to understand what people in her team need in order to thrive and contribute. So the first thing to say is that whenever I ask people to define inclusion, they always say all voices, everybody must be heard, and so on and so forth. You can't have inclusion that says you have to think like this, talk like this, and behave like this, and if you don't, we'll exclude you. So inclusion is not about a set of rules which everybody's expected to agree with. It is that ability as a manager and as a leader to listen to and understand what people can contribute, make sure that the introverts and the extroverts are both able to contribute to the final decision, because that group, those two groups, will contribute in very different ways. And crucially also, the inclusive leader accepts the responsibility of being the leader and says at the end, look, I am genuinely going to listen. I'm genuinely going to include everybody's view. I'm genuinely going to try and make a decision that encompasses your views. But by the way, I'm going to make the decision because I'm the leader. I've got to make that decision, but I'll do it in a way where even if what you wanted to happen doesn't necessarily happen, you know that the decision that was finally made was influenced by everybody's voice. Does that make sense?
Yes, let's hope we get more and more leaders like that, Simon. That sounds wonderful.
Well, it's so difficult because, you know, leaders are under this immense pressure of time. And then people, you know, businesses will then give them targets. Mm-hmm. And you think, why have you given somebody a target? Because if you give somebody a target, all they'll do is aim at it. And the point about targets, I mean, the famous Drucker, the splendid Drucker, the great business guru of the 50s and 60s, is supposed to have said what gets managed, what gets measured gets managed. He didn't say that at all. What he actually said was, I'm paraphrasing, but targets are part of a process of learning whether the human relationships that you've developed in an organization are delivering what you want. So in other words, they're not things on their own, they're indicators of whether it's going right or not going so right. And the key thing is to use them as a way of learning. So if somebody doesn't achieve their targets, the response should not be punishment. The response should be learning. What happened? Mm-hmm. So when we in Powerful Women sort of set targets, I mean, on one level, surely the target's 50-50. I mean, why would it not be? I mean, you know, just frankly. But we set targets at a more iterative level, because what we're trying to do is indicate a direction of travel. We're trying to motivate and break the sort of that connection between desire to do it and the actions. So we're trying to break that inaction cycle that happens. So we're just trying to edge people along and then understand as we go through it, what is it that's holding us back as a sector, as an industry?
So leadership is very important. We need more inclusive leadership, and throughout the spine of management within organizations. It's also about building a team of people who have different perspectives and understand the advantages that can be reaped by the team of recognizing the differences. Could you share with us some thoughts on how to build a team and how important that is? For example, Jim Collins, the management guru, looked at this issue in his book, Good to Great.
Yes, I mean, Jim Collins is I think he's wonderful. He's become quite controversial because the measurement he used was shareholder value, and people say, is that the only value of success of a company, blah, blah, blah. But I think there's some really interesting principles. What I take out of it is, the first thing is that it's the people, you've got to get the people on the bus, as he says. It's, in other words, the strategy will come from having the right people on the bus is number one. So what you have to do is get people who are committed to the direction of travel that you want to take the company or the team or whatever in. We use what I call the virtuous circle of selection. So if you just imagine going round a process, every time you recruit or every time you put together a project team or you promote somebody into a new team, you think to yourself, okay, number one, what is this team trying to do? What is our objective? Secondly, what kind of combination of difference in that team are going to help us to do that? Now, what I don't mean is the tokenistic, let's recruit you so we can sell more soap to your people. I don't mean that, because, you know, there's this terrible tendency to say, CEO said to me the whole time, we need more women, we need more black people. And I say, well, let's pop out in the high street and get 6 assaulted, shall we? And they go, I don't mean, I don't see what they go, I don't mean that. And I say, I know you don't mean that. But until you can define why a combination of different cultures or the two sexes or whatever, until you've got a clearer handle on why that's going to help you understand the market, the product, the service, whatever it is you're trying to deliver. So then you understand that. So what are you trying to do? What kind of combination of difference is going to help you do it better? So who have we already got? So who do we want to add in order to give us that combination? So you're always recruiting for difference rather than, so, you know, people say sometimes we recruit notwithstanding or you know, notwithstanding age and sex and blah, blah, blah. No, you recruit for difference, not despite difference. So you're deliberate. I'll give you an example. So a wealth management company that I mentioned in the book that a friend of mine did some work in. So the woman who ran it came across research that said that the children in certain families follow the savings and investment patterns of their parents. So she thought, if I can identify those families, and if I can, and then she looked at her team and thought, if I can add to my team those that could sell to the younger generation, then actually I might be onto a bit of a winner. That's what they did. So she worked explicitly, and this friend of mine did this work, explicitly with the older heritage people in the firm, if you like, and a bunch of new recruits. She explicitly worked with them to recognize the value that they each brought, so that the old people didn't, or the older people didn't think the young people were just stupid, didn't know anything, and the younger people didn't think the older people were just stupid and didn't know anything young. She explicitly worked with them to respect and use and value what they both brought to the thing. They went out there, they sold cross-generationally, and they doubled the size of the firm. So, you know, those sorts of examples is that explicit recognition of difference and leveraging that difference. And also, that's not just group difference, it's also individual. You know, you'll have people who'll be entrepreneurs in the team, people who are consolidators in the team, people who are big thinkers, people who are detail thinkers. It's all those combinations that you need to make stuff happen in a way that's interesting and innovative.
Simon, not everyone understands yet. I fear the power of difference that you're describing so eloquently and convincingly. What can we do to help those who don't view the power of difference to understand?
Well, I think we can go on saying to people, here are some examples, here are some examples. So there was a recent piece in the Harvard Business Review that looked at the assessment and taking of risk. And they looked at the balance of men and women in executive teams, and they took as their metric whether these executive teams' strategy for growth of their companies was a research and development investment strategy or a mergers and acquisition strategy, which is high, that's a high risk, and former is a lower risk. What they discovered was that the better balance there was between men and women, the more likely they were to take the lower risk, longer long-term value strategy. When they went down into the business and looked at why that was the case, and you can tell me whether you experienced this as a senior woman in a business. When men take a risk in a business, they do something and it doesn't work, the business tends to say, oh, well, he had a go. And when a woman takes a risk, it does something, the business doesn't work, the business tends to say, oh, she can't do it. So consequently, women start to calibrate risk very differently as they move up organizations. So you as a senior woman will have a much higher level of jeopardy, if you like. So what they discovered was that affects the way in which women assess risk. And when you combine that with the men, you get a different discussion about risk. So what I'm saying is I think we constantly need to say to people, question what you're valuing in those that you're appointing. So if you look at the FTSE 100, chairs, chief execs, and chief finance officers, there are more white men called John, David, and Andrew in those top 300 jobs in the FTSE 100 than there are women or people who are not white. Why is that happening? What we find when we research it is that what's happening is that the people appointing the next lot are valuing what they themselves have got. So they're thinking, oh, well, a chief finance officer kind of, quote, looks like this. So the values that I need are this. So, but what I'm saying to this, no, don't do it that way. You've already got that. Don't get more of that, get difference. Because the problem is when you recruit the best, if that is the people that has floated or got to the top of a particular sector in industry, and that sector itself has got way more men at the top than it has women, you're just going to go on appointing more men. So effectively, instead of the best, you're actually appointing the same. So what we've got to do, I think, is convince people that the value of the difference in these very volatile times, in the energy transition, the value of difference at all those levels in a company, that is one of the ways of stimulating innovation and new ways of doing things, which is what we need to make this transition.
Absolutely. And Simon, one of the things I've learned from you is the difference between information bubbles and echo chambers. Could you help us all understand the difference between the two and how that should impact how we make the case for D&I?
Yes. Well, I should say that I learned this mainly from a book. You very kindly mentioned my book, The Power of Difference. So I'm going to mention the second best book on the subject, which is Matthew Said's Rebel Ideas. And it's very interesting. If you look at the shock jocks that have started in the 80s in America on radio, and you've now got it sort of Fox TV, and you've got sort of here, you've got Talk TV and so on and so forth. One of the things that changed was the way in which, instead of arguing with the case, somebody would put up a particular argument. Instead of arguing with the case, what you do is you delegitimize the person making it. So you call them a liberal, or you call them a fascist, or whatever it is. You don't deal with the substance, you delegitimize them. So what you've got is you've got information bubbles and you've got echo chambers. So information bubbles are like cults. So basically a cult exists by not allowing in any light at all, which is why they're hermetically sealed and people leaving them are such a threat to them. So they control the information. The echo chambers, the argument used to be, was what Cass Sunstein, who's the nudge guru, called the Daily Me. And the original argument was, well, what people are doing is they're curating their news and their opinions in such a way they're only hearing things they agree with. What's become evident particularly in social media, but now transferring into interactions between humans live, is that actually that's not what's happening. People are hearing lots of opposite views, but, and here's the problem with the echo chamber, is the more they hear opposing views, the more it confirms them in their original view. So you find that people hear the opposing view and redouble down on their original opinion. So in other words, the opposing view is not creating the kind of dialectic, if you like, a word obviously I learned at Sussex for argument. The argument is not convincing people, it's further dividing people, and it's the terms in which people are arguing. So the problem for us in diversity is that, ironically, this notion of diversity and difference has ironically become a force for conformity. So in businesses, people are saying what diversity means is this set of rules. Well, no. What diversity means is precisely the opposite. It means the valuing of difference, not the attempt to create rules that create conformity. So companies are going to thrive. I would say that the first value they should, people always, but companies always have their value integrity and customer centered. Well, frankly, you shouldn't need to say that your company's got integrity and it's customer focused. I mean, hello. I mean, that's a given. I would say put it the number one value is you value difference. We're a company that values disagreement because we think we can reach positive solutions only through debate and disagreement. But that is your number one value. Because if we're going to I mean, look at the energy transition. Let's look at, attracting more women into, the energy sector or whatever. If we're going to do that, we presumably have got to start valuing the difference that we haven't got. And one way of doing that is changing the balance between men and women. It's not the only way, but it's one way.
And Simon, if we can conclude on an upbeat note of one of the solutions that you propose and advocate for making teams more effective and making the world more diverse and inclusive, can you share with us your thoughts on the importance of meaningful engagement with people who are different from us and contact theory?
Oh, contact theory is really interesting. Well, so one of the things about our preferences and our, let's call them our biases, they're not unconscious, by the way. This idea of unconscious bias implies that they sort of lurk and then, they sort of leap out at you in a kind of, oh my God, that was shocking. No, they're not. They're learned. And we learn them very, very well. And we learn them actually very usefully. One thing we learn to do is not to walk out on a road in front of a moving car. This is a good thing to do unthinkingly. So they may be unthinking preferences. So I was standing with my husband, who is Nigerian, at a bus stop near our house one day, and this black guy went past in a really smart convertible. And I said to Adam, I said, I wonder who he is. And about 4 minutes later, a white guy went past in a really rather smart, different convertible. And I went, oh, nice car. Now, that is a classic example of years and years and years of having images of black men in smart cars who are footballers, drug dealers, whatever. That's a learned preference. And so once you kind of realize that that's your preference, you start to unlearn it. But we can't unlearn these things in a rational way because we didn't learn them rationally. You may remember a Heineken ad, the beer, the lager. So Heineken took two people who radically had different views of a particular issue. So they took an environmentalist and somebody who thought it was nonsense. They took somebody who thought trans issues were kind of completely illegitimate and ununderstandable, and a trans woman. And I can't remember the third one for the moment. And what they did was they filmed these people and asked them their views on the world. They then put them into a warehouse with those people having no idea what they were being asked to do or who the other person was. And there was a flat pack. And they asked them to undo the flat pack and follow the instructions. What they ended up doing was building a little bar together and 2 stools. Inevitably, they were then asked, do you want to stay? And over a beer, of course, it was a commercial. And then they showed them their videos of their opinions. Now, what they had done is they had worked together as equals with a common objective, and they'd been put in a social situation where actually they were collaborating without, if you like, forming previous opinions about each other. In other words, they had a joint task. So of course they all stayed and wanted to talk. And actually they learned more about each other than they had expected. There's one marvelous moment where one of them goes, we know more about each other now than we would have done if we'd been, friends for 5 years. So what contact theory suggests to us is that, and it's not magic this, by the way, but the way we do actually change our views is the more we interact in a positive way as equals on joint projects with people, the more we start to understand and crucially value the difference that we each bring to a task. So the way what we do is we can't train people. We can't train ourselves to be less biased or out of our preferences. We have to redesign systems. So we've invented a recruiting system called Recruiting for Difference, for instance. And it has a diagnostic at the beginning, but crucially, it presents information to those making the selection in a wholly different way, so that instead of presenting information person, candidate by candidate, you give the information, all the answers by the candidates to the first question and all the answers to the second question. All it is a redesign to help us not make our preferential judgments about individuals. So contact theory is constantly asking you to do that. It's asking you to reorganize the way in which we interact and give ourselves, and the crucial bit is this joint exercise. So in a company, you know, all we've got is this thing we're trying to achieve. That's the binding notion, right? That's the only thing we've got in common. And it's through our differences that we can achieve that. Because if you think of your team and you think around your team, you know, if you just in a nanosecond, you know who you rely on in your team and for what. And you'll know, I bet you think sometimes, I wish we had a bit of that. It's that. It's constantly thinking, what haven't I got? What could I add? Where's the difference?
Wonderful, Simon. It's so uplifting to speak with you as ever, and to hear your compelling case so well illustrated for the power of difference and the transformative effect that building meaningful relationships and collaborating with people who are different can have in our lives, in our companies, and our society. Thank you so much, Simon.
Well, bless you. Thank you for a lovely conversation.